All right, I believe we're live. Dr. Perlmutter, welcome to this whole life conversation, a new thing that we're doing now in the Whole Life Challenge. So welcome, it's good to have
I'm
you.
delighted to be with you, and I couldn't think of a better way to spend my afternoon.
All right, I'm going to look off my notes because your about page is extensive. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it might take like 10 minutes. But
you want me to do it for you?
Dr. Perlmutter has been on my podcast before, the Breaking Ordinary podcast. Are you waiting for me or am I waiting for you?
I am. What would you like me to do? I'm here to serve.
I was going to introduce you, but you offered to introduce yourself.
Oh yeah, I'll be happy to. I'm David Perlmutter.
Great.
I'm a neurologist, and I do a lot of work in nutrition. I've written 5 New York Times bestsellers, and I'm delighted to spend time with everybody today. Let's rock and roll.
Let's rock and roll. Awesome. Well, just before we started, I mentioned to you that, one of the things that crosses my mind around coronavirus and this idea of immunity is that at least in my way of thinking, immune health really takes time to develop. And I think it could be easily construed that it's too late. Like it's already here. The virus is here. What can I do in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month that doesn't take years to develop?
Let's take a look at that. And what are we seeing happening right now? What we're seeing is that the people who are having the worst outcome with respect to COVID-19 infection are people who have an acquired over time problem with respect to their immune function. And we call this by various names. We can call it coronary artery disease, we can call it diabetes, we can call it obesity. All of these things share a downregulation of the integrity of the immune system. Now, typically we might not think of obesity as being an immune problem, but it is. We see that the degree of aging, what we call senescence, of the immune system is far advanced in people with obesity, just like it is in type 2 diabetes and in coronary artery disease and even in Alzheimer's. So all of these chronic degenerative conditions that are so very prevalent in our Western society are immune issues at their very heart. They're characterized by the inability of the body to regulate a process called inflammation. That's an immune function. And these are acquired over time. And by and large, they are a manifestation of lifestyle choices, of being sedentary, of eating inappropriately, eating foods that are higher in processed constituents and sugar and the wrong kind of fats, not as much in the way of dietary fiber and nutrient density, etc. So in a very important way, it's good to have a conversation that lets us recognize that outcome as it relates to contracting this virus is very much influenced by the lifestyle choices that we have made up until today. Now, specifically to your point about, well, that's how our immune systems are, I would say that when you realize that your lifestyle choices play such an important role in the functionality and balance of your immune system, it kind of changes the discussion a little bit. And it opens the door for the opportunity for actually changing the functionality of our immune system. We talk about the senescence, like senile, like aging of the immune system. And we know that there are a lot of things that are being looked at now called xenotherapeutics, or ways of rejuvenating our immune systems based upon making certain choices. Our immune cells, our immune system, the cells of our immune systems age with time. And as they age, like everything else, they become less functional. But we have the opportunity to do what is called xeno, meaning old, therapeutics. We can rejuvenate our immune systems, and we can do it relatively quickly in order to have a leg up on all these acquired sort of risk issues that we have experienced over the years. Again, answering your question quite directly. So when we do things to rejuvenate our immune system, we can turn back the hands of time, at least biologically, obviously not chronologically. Well, what do we do? Well, one very powerful thing that we should be thinking about that can help with our immune systems is fasting, either intermittent fasting, caloric restriction. These are ways of letting our bodies amplify a process that our bodies will look for bad or aged immune cells and gobble them up, get rid of them. That's called autophagy, and then repopulate our bodies with younger, more robust, more functioning immune cells. So this is called xenotherapeutics. In addition, there are various things out there now called xenolytics, things that we can take, like quercetin and fisetin. These are flavonoid compounds that you can buy at the health food store or online that target aging cells and get rid of them. There are medications even like metformin that can do this. So we can turn our immune systems around actually very quickly to very specifically answer that question.
Can we talk about some specifics? So you mentioned fasting. Now I do a version of intermittent fasting myself every day. I use MCT oil and butter in my coffee in the mornings, and that kind of helps me through until noon or 1 o'clock, at which time I eat from like 1 till about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Does that count, or does it need to be a complete, utter fast with nothing going into the system?
Well, by definition, that's what fasting is, with the exclusion of water or ice, as it were. By definition, that's what fasting really is. What you're describing is more of a ketogenic type of approach. Right. And the question then becomes how effective is getting into ketosis in terms of getting into a state of autophagy. And I think that is an unsettled question. I think that they are different concepts. I think that the stress induced on your body by caloric restriction that may not begin for 24 to 36 hours is really what signals the body that it needs to start cleaning up and activates this process we call autophagy. So what you're describing is more of a time-restricted eating, but by definition, even the first thing in the morning, the coffee with the MCT and or butter, doesn't qualify for time-restricted eating, doesn't really qualify for fasting, because you're getting fat, you're getting calories, you're getting all kinds of bioactive molecules in coffee, caffeic acid, caffeine, etc., that are having effects, biological effects in terms of your physiology. So by definition, you aren't necessarily fasting or even caloric restricting by virtue of the fact that you're having a very highly caloric dense food first thing in the morning, which is fat. So hard to say exactly what the upsides of what you are doing, with the exception of it sounds like a pretty aggressive ketogenic type of program. And as such, we certainly are aware of lots of benefits of getting into ketosis, of generating those ketone bodies, how they work very efficiently as fuel, and perhaps more importantly, as in terms of how they work as a genetic signaling pathway and a cell signaling event as well.
So if we're going back to fasting, so if we were talking fasting, what are the ways you would recommend people start to explore that? Would you recommend a daily time-restricted window with not what I'm doing, but a real fast? Or would you recommend another version of an intermittent fast?
First thing I'd recommend is, of course, check with your healthcare provider so that this isn't construed as medical advice. That's the disclaimer. But I do believe that, it's not easy for everyone to jump into a 36-hour fast or a 3 to 5 day fast. That's for sure. It takes some getting used to. And the body can absolutely learn to adapt to longer and longer periods of fasting. I think that the notion of time-restricted eating as an entree to more aggressive fasting is a reasonable approach. And I think, we should be looking at the idea of prolonging the time each day until you actually have your first meal. People say, well, I never have breakfast. Well, I would always argue with people, everybody has breakfast. Everybody ultimately breaks their fast unless you have decided never to eat again. Now, you can break your fast, in other words, break fast, at 6 p.m. Or in 2 days, but you're ultimately going to have your break fast, which is when your fast is over. Time-restricted eating might mean that you each day decide not to eat anything, consume no calories or anything else bioactive aside from water until noon or 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. Whatever suits you, whatever seems comfortable. And you might, with time, try to make that a little bit later and a little bit later, maybe not do it every day. And then ultimately try to see how you do with having no food whatsoever from dinner one night until dinner or supper or whatever you call it, the very next day. Now, on our Facebook podcast, we've done a couple of those with several thousand people. And for many, it was their very first time. And we got some really nice comments, not only about how people were feeling, about how they felt about what they may have done for their bodies in a positive way, but unexpectedly, at least on the front end, but retrospectively, we should have thought about it. The profound expressions that many people posted of gratitude, of how their bodies worked, gratitude that they actually could break their fast because they had access to food, which is something that not everybody can say. So, how it raises our level of appreciation, I think, is really quite profound. When you recognize that fasting is really a part of every one of the world's major religions, whether it's the fast of Ramadan, the fast of Yom Kippur, or the fast of Jesus for 40 days prior to public ministry, all of these, global religions incorporate fasting. And it really is an interesting idea that this is a powerful way of getting you reconnected to what really seems to matter most in terms of what's going on around us.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is a distinct difference between an empty stomach and hunger. And I didn't really appreciate that until I did my first 5-day water-only fast about a year ago, just to see if I could. Just to see if, there was a belief that I had that, wow, I don't think I can actually do that. And I can do that. And
I would say
everybody
can do it. I mean, certainly diabetics, brittle diabetics should consult somebody before they even consider engaging a fast. That's for sure. People with hypoglycemia may have issues tolerating it. But I would say that, anyone with any underlying health condition, again, if they're considering fasting, should think about doing it under the guidance of somebody who has experience in fasting. But, we are, as humans, by nature, really geared for fasting. I mean, we came from a time, our genome has been cultivated to really respond to times of feast and famine. And this time of famine, whether it's a day or even longer than that, is what we call a state of hormesis. It's a low-grade stress that puts the body into a situation saying that there's some environmental change. We've got to adapt to it very quickly. And that's when various types of parts of our physiology are actually enhanced. Blood sugar control, for example, shifting us to being able to utilize fat for fuel, liberating ketones to power the brain, ultimately in place of utilizing glucose. So we don't ultimately break down our protein, but can then at least initially break down fat. We need our protein so that we can move around and be able to track the game and find the food. So this low level of stress that ultimately serves us in a positive way, we call hormesis. And there are a lot of different types of hormetic stresses that we can engage in. Even Aggressive physical exercise is a form of hormesis, as is being exposed to extremes of temperature, either very high temperature like in a sauna or ice water immersion. These are stresses that initiate various pathways in the body that ultimately have a very positive effect.
Well, the body changes as a consequence of being stressed. I mean, that's how it's very simple. It's a very simple application in the gym. You want to get stronger, you have to do something that causes your body to have to adapt. And I think that fasting is one of those things. And to learn to be able to function through that period of time that's, say, uncomfortable. Mindy asked a question about what does it do to your metabolism, and she tried it once for like 17 hours, but she started to feel shaky and a bit of a headache. I experienced the same thing on day one, and I just decided that I was going to keep going no matter what I experienced. And by day 3, it got a lot easier. But day 1 was hard. Day 2 was harder than day 1.
Yeah, but like anything else, you get used to it with time. And we have an amazing ability to adapt. That makes us resilient. And the more we want to amplify our resilience, the better off we're going to be able to respond to exogenous stresses. I mean, it's one of the reasons, as this is a bit off topic, but it's one of the reasons that we really want to have a diverse array of bacteria in the gut, a very diverse microbiota represented in our gut, because the more diverse it is, the more resilient we are, the more we're able to respond to various types of threats, of challenges, if you will.
So nutrition obviously is a big area that we've been talking about, fasting. I wanted to ask you also, what are some of the other routes to building this immune function? And I didn't want to leave out lifestyle practices. One of the big ones we talk about a lot is community and connection to other people, and be having a purpose with your tribe, with the people that you belong to. And so I just didn't want to leave that out of the conversation. We certainly don't have to spend a lot of time in it, but I wanted to ask you about that piece and other areas besides nutrition that could be beneficial right now.
It's an excellent question, because it is well beyond nutrition. So many influences on the immune system are really related to lifestyle choices. I think, oftentimes I'm asked, what is the best supplement a person can take in order to bolster immune function? And my response is a good night's sleep. And, people are looking for the latest, greatest supplement. And yet it turns out that is one of the most powerful things that we can engage that will help us in terms of our immune functionality and even our immune balance. There's a sense that we want to have the strongest, most responsive immune system that we can. And it really isn't about that. It's really more about balance in the immune system. As it relates to COVID-19, for example, a response of the immune system that amplifies inflammation is what ultimately serves to be powerfully destructive and threatening in many individuals who are, hospitalized or even in the intensive care unit. We call this, the colloquial name is the cytokine storm, which is an overactivation of one arm of the immune system. We need inflammation. Inflammation is a powerful mechanism whereby we are able to digest and quench invading organisms, be they bacteria or even viral for that matter. But it's this unbridled, uncontrolled upregulation of inflammation that we see occurring in some COVID-19 patients that ultimately can be lethal. So it's more about balancing the immune system. And with overactivity of the immune system, we might see things like autoimmune conditions. And it really, interestingly, brings up an interesting discussion point, and that is that women are far more likely to experience an autoimmune condition like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, various other types of autoimmune conditions in comparison to men. And interestingly, so a sense that their immune systems are at a higher level of activation. And at the same time, as with respect to hospitalized COVID-19 patients, men represent 2/3. So women seem to have some advantage. Is it by virtue of their immune systems being affected by the second X chromosome that they carry? Or is there some disadvantage of the Y chromosome imparted upon males? Or is it more specifically something that has to do with ratios of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone? Well, which is interesting because now we see a trial actually getting underway in New York, giving men estrogen as an attempt to improve their outcome with respect to COVID-19. And in California, a study being done actually giving men and women progesterone, again, as an attempt to augment immune functionality. So, I think that all of what we're seeing in terms of what's appearing online about boosting your immune system, we have to recognize that it's not really necessarily about an overall boost to the immune system that we're looking for. We're looking for balance. We're looking for the right sweet spot response, not too much activity, in which case there'll be a real upsurge in inflammation, and not enough activity, in which case the virus goes crazy and replicates aggressively.
Yeah, can we talk a minute about the cytokine storm? Someone asked me earlier this week, one of our whole life challengers, Andy, she asked, there's an instance, I haven't heard of this, but an instance of blood clotting in younger people as a result of this cytokine storm that you just mentioned. Are you familiar with that theory? And she wants to know, what's your hypothesis, if you've heard of it and you know about it?
It's really, it's a very interesting question. It doesn't appear necessarily that the cytokine storm is a prerequisite for having what is called disseminated intravascular coagulopathy, or this increased clotting of the blood, which also, oddly enough, may present not just with clotting, but also with hemorrhaging or bleeding. So we're not exactly sure what is causing that, if it's directly related to the production of cytokines. Is it related to a carrier protein of iron called ferritin, which we know skyrockets in many of these patients who deteriorate quite quickly? But that is a very highly lethal event, this disseminated intravascular coagulopathy. And in fact, it looks as if many people who are admitted to the hospital have early laboratory findings, elevation of not just ferritin, but it's other things, including something called D-dimer, that are indicative that this process is already starting or a little bit smoldering in the background. So this is something that does happen. How to avoid it? There are some protocols whereby people who are admitted into the hospital right off the bat are put on blood thinners like heparin. The dosage is still being worked out in terms of what they might need, but it's hugely challenging. And once it occurs, it is a significantly aggressive event that often is lethal.
Well, going back to what you had said off of this particular topic, but what you had said about women and their tendency to develop the autoimmune conditions, why would they be developing the autoimmune conditions? Why would that be an advantage? Or is it an advantage? Or am I linking two concepts together that don't belong together?
Does it? The autoimmune condition per se does not seem, carrying the autoimmune condition does not seem to influence outcome right now. Having said that, however, there is some indication that the treatment for various autoimmune conditions may influence outcome. And that very interestingly segues to one very common treatment for rheumatoid arthritis, and that is hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, Plaquenil and or hydroxychloroquine, which are used to treat patients with autoimmune conditions. These are drugs that were originally developed for the treatment of malaria and then have been looked at as potential treatment ideas as it relates to COVID-19. So there is some interesting interaction there with hydroxychloroquine, as it directly seems to influence the immune system that I think is not necessarily getting a lot of attention, but should. I mean, let's ask ourselves, why do people take hydroxychloroquine? And basically, there are two important reasons to take that medication unrelated to COVID-19. Number one is malaria, though it has been used in other viral infections and even in HIV, which is a viral infection. And the other time that it's been used, as we all recognize, is in the treatment of autoimmune conditions. So in the treatment of malaria, as people explored it and then recognized that it was effective against certain viruses, it has to do with how viruses get into the cell, A, and B, how does the virus, once in the cell, replicate? And it looks like hydroxychloroquine might influence that. And that said, beyond that, though, what are the effects of hydroxychloroquine on suppressing the immune system to the extent that it's helpful in individuals with respect to autoimmune conditions? I do not think there's a lot of talk or research going on as it relates to that. And, really just as an aside relating to hydroxychloroquine, it isn't a free ride. I mean, the notion of let's just get some hydroxychloroquine approved and start treating everybody, who is hospitalized or maybe even at home with hydroxychloroquine, probably not a great idea for a number of reasons. Number one, it doesn't seem to work. Probably the best reason, though initial studies may have indicated it might have worked in combination with Zithromax or even alone. But the second thing is, it's not necessarily a free ride. When we were told that, what do you got to lose? Just go ahead and take hydroxychloroquine. Two reasons that we should be careful with that drug. First, we know that it can have an effect on heart rhythm. Though it's a small percentage of people who have this issue, it can be a significant issue. And the second is that it can, in certain people, lead to something called hemolytic anemia, which can be life-threatening, meaning that their red blood cells are destroyed by virtue of the fact that they have an underlying enzyme disorder. So that is, this underlying enzyme disorder that puts people at risk when they take hydroxychloroquine is not insignificant in terms of how prevalent that enzyme disorder is. And it's called G6-PDH deficiency. And it turns out that's the most common enzyme deficiency on planet Earth, affecting some 400 million individuals, highly prevalent, oddly enough, in African American populations, rather in Africans as well, where lots of anti-malarial drugs are utilized. So this is something to think about, that we would not want to be just capriciously prescribing hydroxychloroquine, at least without doing an EKG to screen people for underlying cardiac rhythm issues, and also screen people for this G6-PDH issue as well, which is not hugely uncommon. Not very common, but give that hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine to someone with that enzyme deficiency, and you're asking for problems. So while the numbers percentage-wise are very low in terms of who is at risk, when you multiply that out by hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not potentially billions of people who might take this drug, then those numbers become actually very important.
Right. Okay, so in the interest of time, there are so many wormholes that are available to go down this conversation. I could probably be here for another 2 hours talking with you, but in the respect of your time and our listeners' time, if someone came to you today and said, I want to sue both in the short term and the long term, for my immune function, like to make myself anti-fragile in terms of how do you steer them down?
What would I recommend? So what I would say is step one, embrace the notion that you and your lifestyle choices can have a profound impact on how your immune system works, and as such might very well influence your destiny as it relates to outcome with respect to COVID-19 infection, should you get it. Having said that, you're probably going to get it. I mean, probably at least 70 to 80% of people globally are going to get this infection, according to, our well-respected institutions. So that said, I would think that diet is certainly very important. We want to nurture our gut bacteria. That's first and foremost, because our gut bacteria regulate the efficiency of our immune systems through multiple mechanisms, through direct interaction with our via chemical messengers on our white blood cells, through regulating the set point of inflammation as it is influenced by gut leakiness, which is one of the important jobs of our gut bacteria. So that would mean eating a diet that is lower in sugar, dramatically, lower in refined carbohydrates, and much lower in ultra-processed foods, and welcoming high fiber foods back to the table. Color is important, lots of different color and lots of fiber. Recognize that animal products do not contain any fiber at all. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to be vegetarian, but keep in mind that you need your dietary fiber. So if you choose to eat a chicken and fish and all that, wonderful if that's your decision, but make sure to include high fiber foods to nurture your gut bacteria. I'm not a vegetarian. I eat eggs and fish and occasional chicken, but I'm really very involved in making sure I get a lot of dietary fiber. I take dietary fiber as a supplement, and I've been growing now since this whole thing started kale and spinach, no, not spinach, lettuce and lots of other vegetables in the yard. And as such, I have a lot of access to high fiber foods. But you know what? You can take fiber as a supplement. The next thing I would say, and I'm not ranking these, is pay a lot of attention to the quality and quantity of your sleep. Do everything you can to get a good night's sleep. That means be careful of blue light that comes from your computer screens, your television screen, any time in the afternoon or evening. Limit your caffeine consumption after, let's say, 2 p.m. Make sure to get a lot of good exercise that'll help you go to sleep at night. Make sure your room is dark. Turn your phone off. A little bit cooler in the room may well help you sleep. So sleep is fundamentally important. The next thing I would recommend is get a good night's sleep. And I'm repeating myself, I know, but I'm doing it for a very important reason. And that is because nobody seems to understand how incredibly influential a good night's sleep is in terms of your immune system, in terms of your decision making. The very next day, if you've not gotten a good night's sleep, the poor decision-making part of your brain, called the amygdala, is 60% more active, meaning you're much less likely to make good decisions in terms of your diet, in terms of your lifestyle choices that day. You're much less likely to turn off the TV in the evening and to eat good food. And what will that do? A crappy night's sleep yet again. So first was food, second was sleep, third was sleep. So sleep gets double billing. Exercise is a critically important player for your immune system, for managing stress. Meditation should be done on a daily basis. What a powerful tool for your immune system. Meditation, who knew? I think that nature exposure has certainly proven its value in balancing the immune system as well. That means getting outside, or if not, it means experiencing nature indoors. Now, that's not a contradiction in terms. That's not an oxymoron, indoor nature. You can have a houseplant. You can even have photographs of natural environments. They work. They've been demonstrated to reduce cortisol, the stress hormone that ultimately threatens immune function. So there are a lot of things that we can be doing every single day that do work to improve immunity. And, as it relates to football, people have said the best defense is a good offense. We don't really have anything proven to be powerfully effective on the offense just yet. So all we have is defense. And what I've just given you are a lot of powerful tools to really amplify your defense. And, these may go a long way in terms of reducing your risk for having a bad outcome as it relates to COVID-19.
It's funny, when you made that analogy, I immediately went to, you're giving us actually our offense for our defense. Like that, like doing these things are actions. And that, in my thinking, is offense. Like my offense for myself is to do these things, which will build my defense against the rest of the world.
Well, that's right.
So I love that. It's a great analogy.
You're really talking about being proactive. You're talking about really, being involved in, in doing things on the front end, being proactive, getting out there, getting ahead of it. And look, what have we noted here in America? Really, in fact, first we'll start globally. Who's having a bad outcome? Well, if you're really old or older, you have a higher risk of a bad outcome. But your outcome is powerfully influenced, not necessarily because of your age chronologically, but by your age biologically. And you can affect that by, in the discussion that we had earlier on in terms of xenotherapeutics. But who has a bad outcome? Obesity, coronary artery disease, diabetes, all of these chronic degenerative conditions that are by and large lifestyle choices or manifestations of lifestyle choice set the stage for a crappy outcome. And you can control those. You can lower your blood sugar by lifestyle choice. You can lose weight by lifestyle choice. And you don't have to end up with coronary artery disease. It's not just a thing to suddenly go to the doctor and have a bad CT calcium index of your coronary arteries. The next thing you know, you're on a statin drug. It doesn't just happen that way. Certain people do get it and certain people don't get it. There are some genetic risk factors, that's for sure. But by and large, we know who gets coronary artery disease. It's people who have made the worst choices as it relates to lifestyle.
Yeah, it's almost like COVID-19 is a I was going to say truth serum. It forces people to look in the mirror and go, like, what's really going on here?
Right.
Like, these decisions they've been making actually matter. And up until that point, they might not have even thought that they mattered.
Exactly
they
right.
Really do matter.
When we first started, Andy, you and I today, talking about these immune problems, including bad response to COVID-19, coronary arteries, diabetes, obesity. I mean, I think you might have been a little bit surprised. These are all immune inflammatory disorders, all of them. So in a very real sense, the lifestyle choices are paving the way for diseases that we've known about already, and this new one that happens to come along the way, and also is taking advantage of what a person has done over the years. Now, I hope this doesn't sound like pointing fingers, because the glass half full here is that we can right now today begin to make changes that will affect our blood sugar control, our body weight, and our immune function as it relates to having a better outcome with respect to COVID-19. We can start it now. And you say, well, what are we going to do in 2 weeks? This isn't going to be done in 2 weeks or 2 months. We've got a long way to go as we move through this. People are ultimately going to get to a point where they're going to say, you know what, I've had enough. I'm going to go out now and relax the efforts of social distancing and hand washing and wearing masks. I'm going to go ahead and get this and just get it over with. And a lot of people who do that, especially Americans who do that, are taking a heck of a chance. Because by and large, Americans don't have great health. We have amongst the highest rates of these chronic degenerative conditions on the planet, despite the amount of money we spend on healthcare, which far exceeds any other developed country, that our longevity has been lower than other developed countries for the last 4, not years, decades. So we've got an underlying big problem with respect to the notion of healthcare. It has nothing to do with health. It only has to do with disease. We don't really foster health in America. We're involved in taking care of people once they develop diabetes or have a heart attack or develop Alzheimer's or an autoimmune condition, not what we can do on the front end. It's a statement of fact. We rank, according to the World Health Organization, in total provision of healthcare around 23rd compared to other nations. So you're right, it's come to call. Now the COVID-19 has made it very obviously that we were set up for this, not just in terms of our underlying health putting us at risk, but in terms of the whole system, in terms of testing, in terms of equipment, in terms of ventilators, in terms of protective equipment. We got caught, and we're doing our best now to catch up to the level of care that we've seen in other countries like Germany, like South Korea, who've done a heck of a job in dealing with this. Even China, truth be known, if we believe what they're reporting. I certainly believe what Germany is reporting and what South Korea reporting. They're doing a heck of a job, and we are doing our best to catch up at this point. And I think we will. I think we will catch up. But lesson for us moving forward, that we need to be better prepared, not just in terms of being able to make provisions, provide the health care, but in terms of how we treat our population and move towards a more healthy population. Because that's what became very clear this time around, was that, our morbidity and mortality related to COVID-19 called us out in terms of having underlying health that was not good in comparison to other countries. And it became very obvious when suddenly it came to America, and we were noticing that younger people were going into the hospital. And it was a real head scratcher. Why are our younger Americans ending up having a bad outcome? Because, gosh, these people in their 20s and 30s, well, they're young and healthy. And I think that's the language that we have to move away from. Yes, they're young, but no, they're not healthy. Our rates of obesity and things like diabetes in younger Americans are far in excess of what we see in other countries, and we got caught by it. So you're right. It was a great revelation that what COVID-19 has really revealed in terms of our underlying health or lack thereof.
Well, and just to touch on one thing you said, it's not just a responsibility of a government to take care of its people. There's a responsibility of the people to take care of ourselves. And, it's like they teach you that when the first time you go river rafting. I'm a big kayaker. And the first time you go river rafting, they teach you that if you get ejected from the boat, the first source of rescue is not the guide. It's not the boat. It's not somebody on shore to throw you a tow line. It's you. You have to be aware. You've got to rescue yourself. You've got to work your way towards shore. You've got to keep your head above the water. You got to make yourself into a log. And it's the same with our health. And I think that's something that's been missing. We're as a culture, we're looking for the doctor or the drug or the government or the handouts that are going to save us, or
yes,
the vitamins
that's the nature
of the short term
in which we live, because it's good for business,
right,
for us to really offload our health decisions to pharmaceutical companies and doctors who are basically pawns of the pharmaceutical company. I've been there. I know what it's like. I know that my journals are peppered with ads for this or that drug, and even television for the direct to consumer is loaded with drugs for this and the other. So we are inculcated with this notion of live your life come what may, when you have a problem, our modern technology will fix it. Well, that doesn't work. There's no treatment that works for Alzheimer's, and yet we know, for example, that by and large, our lifestyle choices are hugely influential as it relates to Alzheimer's, affecting 5.8 million Americans, for which there is a disease for which there is not only no cure, but no meaningful treatment whatsoever. Who gets Alzheimer's at a much higher rate? Diabetics, for example. Well, if diabetics have a 2 to 4-fold increased risk for Alzheimer's, an untreatable disease, then what can we do to keep people from becoming diabetic? We know there's a dramatic risk reduction in getting type 2 diabetes if you exercise, and also if you eat a diet that's lower in, who knew, sugar. So, but we're told, hey, eat whatever you want. You don't need to exercise. When you get diabetes, you'll take this drug because it lowered my A1C. That's not the answer. You're still overweight. You're still diabetic. You're still at risk for coronary artery disease. You're still at risk for Alzheimer's and a lot of other conditions. So we've got a lot of work to do in the world of functional medicine, integrative medicine, to really get out the idea that we are our first advocates when it comes to when we're suddenly thrown out of our kayaks, that we, A, know what to do, B, we had sense enough to put on a life jacket prior to, C, on our kayak, we've got a pump, D, we know how to right our kayaks, and ultimately, at the end of it, step 5 is when then we get assistance by our fellow kayakers. But we've got to be our own advocates for not only our health and how we survive a kayak spill on the front end. You're exactly right. It's a great metaphor.
Dr. Perlmutter, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your wisdom, and your continued, just your stand for the people taking responsibility for themselves and growing and nurturing themselves and becoming better humans. It's inspiring, and I'm really grateful that you're part of this, the journey with us.
Well, Andy, thank you for having me, and thanks for putting all this together and really doing your best to get information out, because you know, it's good to do this, get information to people, then people go through it, see what seems to resonate for them and what they don't want to participate in. That's a person's choice. Our mission is at least to put it out there and make it available. So thank you.
Absolutely. Hey, wait 1 second, and I'm just going to end the broadcast, and we'll talk for a second.